All right, so this is our third and final part for our review for Unit 3. So last time we left off, we were talking about how a bunch of technologies and culture and ideas had diffused across Eurasia during time period 3, during the post-classical era. And one of the most famous examples, of course, is gunpowder being diffused from China, from East Asia, across Central Asia, into the Middle East, and into Europe, thanks primarily to the Mongols, right, who adopted that technology and used it as they conquered more and more territory. Now, war also led the Europeans to be reintroduced to some of the more luxurious goods and increase their interest in wanting to trade for those luxurious goods like spices and silks, um, and connect Europe, especially Western Europe, to the the spice trade across Eurasia. And we also see after the Crusades the arrival of citrus and sugar into Europe, primarily into southern Europe, right, where the Mediterranean would be, and that'll again increase interest in the goods that the East, whether it's the Middle East or South Asia or like India or China, uh, have to offer. All right. The third and final kind of like main concept here for Unit 3 is increased economic productive capacity, right? So that means there's going to be a lot of new like innovations in the way people produce food, and that's going to change everything pretty much. So, for example, we see new technologies or new ideas or new crops or new methods, new systems, I guess you want to call them. And we see them all over different parts of the world. So, for example, in the Aztecs, you see the Chinapa system, right? That floating garden system. In the Incas, up in the Andes Mountains, and in China, we see terracing, improved terracing than before. The Incas, they call it waru, waru. We see the horse collar, right? The collar will allow the horse to do more, exert more effort, exert more labor without hurting the animal. And it was a Chinese invention that eventually makes its way to Europe. The Europeans are going to be practicing crop rotation, right? Where every year they switch the crops that they are growing in their three field system. So the point is, with all these new innovations, we see that there's going to be increased food production, right? Agricultural production, more food than ever before, right? Champa rice, right, being adopted from Southeast Asia, from Vietnam, during the Tang and the San Dynasty, eventually would lead to greater and greater population growth. We see crops are going to be transported, right? We mentioned already citrus and sugar coming from the east, coming from India and Southeast Asia. They're going to make their way into the Mediterranean, into the Middle East. Cotton as well will become more and more popular outside of India. Remember, India always used to be the main cotton producing area. That's going to change as more and more places are going to adopt cotton and also adopt slavery. Now, of course, with all the surplus of food production, that means there's going to be less people necessary to be farmers. So that means more people are going to have other jobs of producing goods, right? They're going to be artisans, they're going to be craftspeople. We see this primarily in China, in Persia, and India, and they're going to be producing luxury goods like silks and fabrics and rugs and carpets and cotton and stuff like that, porcelain. And there's also going to be an increased number of merchants who are going to buy and sell these goods, for a profit. Now, cities are going to be affected a lot, right? Some of the classical cities are going to decline, while some of the new post-classical cities are going to thrive. Now, some cities are going to be completely destroyed, or they're going to, decline. So places like Baghdad and Kiev, of course, they were destroyed by the Mongols during the Mongols invasions. Sometimes diseases will wipe out cities. Uh, the bubonic plague will do devastation to the Italian city-states and also to the former Chinese capital of Chang'an. Remember, after the Black Death, the capital of China goes from Chang'an to Beijing, right, which is the modern capital. Towards the end of the post-classical era, there's climate change that's called the Little Ice Age, where the worldwide temperature kind of goes down a bit, and which makes it a little bit harder to grow food, and therefore a lot of places, the cities, kind of have to decline because there's not enough food production to maintain them. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we see that there's going to be new factors that allowed new cities to grow and expand and revive themselves. So obviously, after any war, we see more stability and less invasion. So cities will grow there. We see safe and reliable transport that would allow people to, of course, live in cities, commerce or trade, more production, more labor, right? More available labor, agricultural production, right? So if you have these factors, then you would have the growth of new cities, right? These are kind of things you need for a city to grow. So, so some cities, of course, they're going to maintain their importance, and they're not, they're going to be political centers, they're going to be religious centers, they're going to be cultural centers, and commercial centers, right? So kind of the main ones that fall under these three categories would be Constantinople, right? Where it was not only the Byzantine capital, it was also the center of the Orthodox religion, and it was a center of trade, right, across Eurasia. Baghdad, right? It was the Abbasid capital. It was a culture and education center, and it was a center of the Silk Road trade. Timbuktu was the capital of Mali, right? Also a cultural educational center. Remember, they brought Mansa Musa brought back all these Islamic scholars and doctors and engineers to build this city for him, and it was also a center of the trans-Saharan trade. Right, so we see the pattern here, right? These are political capitals, they're religious centers, cultural centers, and they're also trade centers, right? Hangzhou, which is in southern China, is a port city. It was the center. It was one of the center, places of the Indian Ocean trade, and it was one of those large multicultural, cosmopolitan cities that would have diasporic communities, right, of merchants. Now, the classical cities that we saw, in time period two, they're going to kind of decline, and other places that other cities will take on their importance. So places like Rome and Athens, right? Um, Athens in Greece, Alexandria in Egypt, right? Chang'an, right? All these places are going to decline um, in importance. So like Rome, for example, the Italian city-states, Paris, London, right? Those would be kind of the places that would replace Rome. Um, Athens, right, in Greece, the Byzantine capital, Constantinople, would replace that one. Cairo would replace Alexandria. Beijing would replace Chang'an. So the agricultural production around the world changes. It changes the growth of cities, right, or the decline of cities, but it also changes labor systems, right, the way people, workers are organized, and it kind of depends on the governments. So in some places, the labor system pretty much stays the same. Like for example, in Russia and in Japan, they're gonna have serfs, they're gonna have peasants, right? So were the Europeans for most of this time period. And these peasants, they have very little rights. They don't own the land. They work the land for the Lord. They get to keep some of the crops that they grow, but they don't earn a profit. They don't can't save up money. There is no money. It's just bartering. So we see that, that's the serf labor, serfdom, and peasant labor, right? But then we see free peasants occur, come to existence, right? And this would be in late medieval Europe, where the free peasants will be able to charge and earn a salary or earn a wage for their work. And we see this in the regrowth of cities across Europe. As more and more people are moving back to cities, they're going to demand, that they don't have to pay the, taxes that a peasant has to pay. We see guild organizations as well in Europe and also in India. Remember, the guilds are organizations of workers um, who agreed to organize their labor and decide how many people work in a city, how many, what is the quality control of the product that they make, right? And these guilds, whether it's like the blacksmith guild or the shoemaker guild or the tailor guild, right? They all have these like steps and process and stages that you go through to join their ranks, right? So by kind of being like this professional organization, they're able to kind of like control the prices of goods and control the prices of labor, right? And say, okay, if you want us to make your shoes or your clothing or your weapons, then you have to pay us X amount. But we see this again in Europe and India. Nomadic pastoralism, right? This is a labor system. We see this, of course, with the people like the Mongols and the Turks of Central Asia. We also see it in sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of sub-Saharan African people are going to remain nomadic pastoralism. We also see them in North Africa with the Berbers, right? The people who were nomadic pastoralists with camels in North Africa. Of course, we're going to see forced labor. That's going to be continuity. There's always going to be slavery. And kind of like the main place that we see slavery take root is in the Islamic world. Tribute payments, right? That's what going to be like kind of a new thing. And the Tang dynasty of China, the Aztecs, they're going to be the main participants of tribute payments. We also have the military obligation, which is the Byzantine theme system. That's going to be kind of a change because no other country, no other empire had it. As I always see some pictures of, the different labor, forced labor people. Social structures are going to be affected by the class and caste hierarchies. So remember, your status in India is based off of a caste system, which is based off of Hindu religion, religious beliefs. In feudal Europe and feudal Japan, right, your birthplace, whether you're a peasant or a noble, determines your status, and there is no, social mobility. Same in the caste system. In China, the hierarchy is based off of Confucian teachings, right? With the educated at the top, peasants and laborers in the middle, and merchants at the bottom. And then we have the Aztecs and the Incas who have that religious military system where warriors and priests are considered the upper class. Patriarchy is still going to be, practiced throughout the world. In some places, women had more rights than in other places, had more influence than other places. Some major examples will include kind of like the exceptions. Mongol women who not only fought in battle, because they fought in battle, they're often given more rights. And remember, when the Mongols ruled China under the Yuan dynasty, they would ban foot binding, they would ban female infanticide to try to make China less patriarchal, right? West African women, right? The Muslim women of places like Mali and Ghana. I remember these women who were Muslims. They did not veil. They did not have restrictions that they had to stay at home, or they did not have restrictions that they couldn't interact with men outside of their families. And these are some of the rights that Ibn Battuta was always critical of. So West African women did have more rights than other Muslim women. In Southeast Asia and Vietnam, right, when the Chinese ruled over Vietnam for about 1,000 year period, 800 year period, the Vietnamese um, rejected all these kind of like patriarchal restrictions, and Southeast Asia women definitely had more rights than in China. In Japan, women were also, were restricted in many sense, but we see that the literature of Japan is going to be dominated by women. Women were educated, upper class women, of course, were educated in Japan, and because they're confined to the private home, their job is to, one of the jobs that many of them take is to write, because it's something that they can, express themselves through writing. And the famous example of this would be Lady Murasaki Shikibu. She's the author of the world's first novel called The Tale of Genji. All right. There's going to be new forms of coerced labor. And coerce means forced, right? To coerce someone is to force them. And these new forms, are going to expand, or they're going to we're going to see them come up. They're going to be created during the post-classical era. We're going to see that there's going to be a shift in people demanding more rights, workers demanding more rights. Um, but also we're going to see the increase of slavery, the popularity of slavery. So, for example, the practice of serfdom, right? That's going to be a new invention, right? Of telling people you're tied down to the land, you can't leave. You produce everything for the lords, right? And the lords will protect you. So that's something that the Japanese and the Europeans had during their feudal era. The Inca Mita system will be similar in the sense that everyone has to, like, is forced to pay tribute to the government by working a few weeks out of the year for the government. All right, so that's the Mita system. We see peasants are going to revolt in China for more rights. Peasants are going to revolt in the Byzantine Empire for more rights, and they're going to demand, the wealth that the wealth gap between the rich and the poor is not as wide. Also, again, the last thing is that we're going to see increased slavery. So the Muslims, of course, are going to be the main driving force for that popularity of slavery. They're going to be importing the Mamluks, right, which are the Turkic slaves, into their empire. The Abbasids are going to also be trading with the Africans, sub-Saharan Africans, um, for slaves that were going to make their way to the Mediterranean, to North Africa, or to the Middle East, right? Places like Mesopotamia to work on sugar and cotton plantations. And they're also going to send them to India, where they're going to work there as well. All right, so that's it for our third and final part of Unit 3. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the new year.